What's up, YouTube? This is True Raw for TV, and this is a video I always wanted to do, but never got around to it. But today is the perfect day. I want to talk about Glen Rice, right? In particular, I want to talk about one of the greatest individual scoring and shooting seasons that I've ever witnessed from an offensive player. And that was Glen Rice's 1996-97 season. And it's somewhat bittersweet to talk about this season because while Glen Rice finally ascended to a level that we all knew that he was capable of reaching, he was not able to sustain it. And while he still had a very good individual NBA career, average I think 18.3 points per game for his career. But after this season, he regressed back to what we saw before. And eventually age and weight gain caught up with him, and he never really was the same player. But before this, we remember Glen Rice when he was with Michigan during the tournament in 1989. He set a NCAA scoring record that I think still stands. So we've always seen this and witnessed this in Glen Rice. And his first 2 years in the NBA, he was with the Miami Heat, and he was known as a great shooter. But it was when he was traded to the Charlotte Hornets that he became a more complete scorer. With the Miami Heat, he had burst games. He was probably known as the greatest, in his era, the greatest streak or burst player in the league. There were many games when he was in Miami Heat that he would erupt. There was a 46-point game that he had, I believe, with the Miami Heat. There was the 56-point game that he had on national television not too long after Michael Jordan scored 55 against New York Knicks. Glen Rice on NBC against the Orlando Magic, one of the best teams in the NBA. He scored 56 points. And I think the very next night, Michael Jordan held him to like 13 points or something like that. But let's just go to show he was very streaky. All right, one of the game's best shooters, but he was streaky. And it was the 96-97 season where Glen Rice really put it all together, man. He went from just being a guy that shot from the outside to being a guy that could occasionally put it on the floor and take it to the basket. But it wasn't just the outside shooting. He could shoot it from all over the court. He could shoot the mid-range jumper. He could score in the paint occasionally. And that's what we were seeing. We were seeing a great overall shooter. And that's why sometimes when I talk about Stephen Curry, that's why I'm so specific about whether I would consider him the greatest shooter. I can see the argument. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to call someone a moron if they call Stephen Curry the greatest shooter of all time. Because believe me, there's a lot to support that argument. But I just think that it's too presumptuous to call him that. But Glen Rice, this individual season, it also coincided with team success. I believe the Charlotte Hornets that year won 54 ball games, all right? And it seemed like the Charlotte Hornets were turning a corner in that year. They still have an NBA record, if I'm not mistaken. That 1996-97 team still has the NBA record for the highest team three-point percentage. I think it was something close to 43%. Because people forget that Steph Curry's dad, Dale Curry, was on that team as well. And there was a lot of great shooters on that team. But Glen Rice, especially toward the second half of that season, was absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. In fact, from December 30th, 1996 until the end of that season, Glen Rice actually led the NBA in scoring. He averaged 26.8 points per game for the regular season, which I think was third behind Michael Jordan and Karl Malone. But from December 30th to the end of the season, let's just say April 20th, Glen Rice averaged 29.9 points per game. Essentially, he averaged 30 points per game in that span. And he was doing this in the 1990s, the late 1990s, when there was still hand checking going on, when the pace of the games was slower, teams played in more half-court sets. It's not this free-flowing up and down game that we have today, which causes the expansion of numbers. Like today's game, I always mention this about the 60s, and I try to explain why Wilt Chamberlain had those insane rebounding numbers. And I'm kind of glad that with the opening up of the offense and the more free-flowing game today, it supports the argument I've been making for years on here as to why the 60s, the numbers were so inflated. That's why now you see a guy like James Harden with multiple 40-point triple-doubles. But when I argue with people on here, they're telling me, no, the players are there better. They're not. They're playing in an atmosphere in a game that's more conducive for putting up big offensive numbers. Why do you think you see triple doubles with the frequency you see today? In the 1990s, you seldom saw a triple double. You seldom saw it. That's really what makes Jason Kidd so remarkable, because he did it essentially on a lot of teams, in particular the New Jersey Nets when he was in his prime. He was doing it on teams that really didn't feature either a lot of offensive premier players or the style of play that they had wasn't really a free-flowing type. But back to Glen Rice, though. He had an amazing stretch, man. And Michael Jordan, during that period of time, the league's leading scorer, averaged 28.8 points per game. And as you can see in the graphics up here, Glen Rice shot 49.2% from the floor during that stretch and 49.4% from beyond the arc. That's insane. And during his era, even for his era, he was a prodigious three-point shooter. He put it up a lot. I think he led the NBA not only in three-point percentage for the season, which was 47%, but he led in three-pointers made, I believe. And Michael Jordan shot from the three-point range very well. He shot 38, close to 39%, which was very, very good. But Glen Rice was on a historic level that year from an offensive standpoint. In fact, there's another number I want to throw at you guys. Stephen Curry, during the 2015-16 season, all right, the year he averaged 30 points per game, led the NBA in scoring, led the NBA in steals, when they won 73 ball games, when he made 402 three-pointers. 34 of the 82 games that he played, Stephen Curry shot 50% or better in three-pointers. He shot 50% or better in three-pointers in 34 out of 82 games, which is phenomenal. But Glen Rice in this season, the 96-97 season, he shot 50% or better from three in 38 out of 82 games. Just to put things, to give a comparison. Now, of course, Glen Rice didn't shoot quite as much as Stephen Curry did, nor did he shoot as many threes, but he did shoot a lot of them. And also, Glen Rice didn't just get all of his points from shooting off screens. As you can see, in the little clip I just put up there, there's a little clip I put up there. Oftentimes, Glen Rice will put the ball on the floor and actually create his own shot. He wasn't the greatest shot creator in the world, but he was making a lot of strides that year. And not only, was he putting up phenomenal scoring numbers in just regular season games, but the All-Star game, he set a record for most points in a quarter with 20. All right. Breaking Wilt Chamberlain's record at the time. And I mean, I was just astonished at watching this guy shoot. And what I was also astonished at was how sustained his offensive attack was. Like, basically from January all the way to the end of the season, it was like Glen Rice was on steroids or something. Now, he wasn't on steroids, but you get what I'm saying. Just to emphasize how well he was playing. To the point where, if I'm not mistaken, I remember Charlotte played the New York Knicks that year. The Knicks won 57 ball games. And a lot of Knicks fans that I knew were nervous because Glen Rice had been on fire. And he had torched the Knicks during the regular season, including a 42-point game at the Garden. So they were nervous about that series. Now, fortunately, I remember serving correctly, they were able to sweep Charlotte in that series and hold Glen Rice to, I think, like 20 points per game or something, a little bit underwhelming considering what he was doing in the regular season. So this is the part that's a little bit sad to me, a little bit, is that Glen Rice, the next season, he goes back to what we saw before. He goes back to being a 22 points per game guy, which is great, but you thought that he would stay on the sustained level that he was playing at. And then, shortly thereafter, Glen Rice became, as he moved past the age of 30, he started having more injury issues. And essentially for the rest of his career, he became more of a third option type guy, second to third, well, really third option after his Lakers stint, and then eventually a role player where he became basically just a specialty three-point shooter in the early 2000s. I remember him having stints with the Knicks and the Houston Rockets and the Clippers. I remember him putting on a little bit of weight, and he was basically just a jump shooter specialist, three-point specialist at the time. And while he had a very good career, he didn't have a Hall of Fame career. If we had seen at least maybe 3 more of those seasons that we saw in 97, you can make the case maybe that Glen Rice should be in the Hall of Fame. Glen Rice finished his career with, I think, 18,336 points. And I think he played in exactly 1,000 games, I think it was. And while those are awesome numbers, they're not Hall of Fame caliber. But Glen Rice should have scored. Glen Rice, if he took, I think, well, I can't say if he didn't take good care of himself, but if his knees didn't give out on him, and if he had peaked a little bit earlier, instead of at age 29 and 30, maybe at 25, 26, maybe he does enough to be a Hall of Famer. But his peak should have sustained longer. And I shouldn't only be talking about one season, but I have to talk about that one season because it's still one of the greatest offensive explosions I've ever seen from a player for a season. And up until Stephen Curry, if someone asked me who was the greatest shooter I've ever seen, I would have said probably Glen Rice when he was on. And even still to this day, when Glen Rice was on, I've never seen a guy shoot the basketball the way he did. Never. And he was an awesome player in his prime, and that year he was truly something special, man. Truly something special. If only he could have done it for a little bit longer.